Be'ezus Hashem, today's daf is Masechta Makos Daf Yomi. We're almost finishing here. We're discussing the mitzvah of bikurim. We learned in the previous daf and that how does bikurim get into Malkus? That if let's say a non-Kohen eats the bikurim, so you get Malkus. Now, what is bikurim? So I'm just calling up the psukim so we'll get a background in the Gemara. The pasuk says in Parshas Kisavai, when you come to Israel and you inherited and you got rid of the goyim and you're settled in the land, the Torah tells you v'lo kachta. You got to take meirashes from the first fruits of the seven minim of kol pri adama, and then asher you're going to bring it home. If these are the type of fruits that you're going to bring home, you have to like tie a ribbon around it, and then when it ripens, what you should do is the samto batena. You put it in the basket, and basically you're going to go to the Beis Hamikdash. So you bring the basket of fruits, let's say pomegranates, grapes, figs, whatever, and you bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. Now, normally you don't have to bring the gifts to the Kayan to his house. He has to come pick it up from you. But Bikurim is different. You have to actually physically bring it to the Beis Hamikdash. And the Torah tells you that you should come to the Kayan that's in those days, even though you don't think much of him, and you have to tell him out loud, Higati hayoim l'Hashem Elokecha, I'm expressing today that I am not a kafui toiv, that I'm not a denier of all the good in my life, that I have a piece of real estate and that I can plant, and it's in Eretz Yisrael. Now, this is very important. The kohen takes the basket from your hands, right? And he lifts it along with you. So imagine you and the kohen are lifting the basket, and then you put it down right by the mizbeach. Then the Torah says you have to make this announcement. You should say the following: Arami Ovid Avi, basically, you're saying the history of the Jewish people. These psukim look familiar. Obviously, they're from the Haggadah. And you say, "Wow, look how far I've come! How far I've come! I was a slave in Mitzrayim, and Hashem took us out, and now He brought me to this beautiful place, Israel, and now I'm bringing my first fruits that God gave me. I'm giving it as a gift." You do another waving when you pick up the basket again and you wave it around, and then b'hinachto you put it down lifnei Hashem Elokecha, and you bow. Okay, that's what then you leave and be happy with everything that Hashem gave you. Be someach bechelkai. So that's the mitzvah of bikurim. What happens to the bikurim after you leave? The kohen takes it home. That's his gift. So now we're on Daf Yutes. We're starting from the bottom of Yutes, Amid Beis. Amar Rava Bar Ada, Amar Rav Yitzchak. Rava Bar Ada said in the name of Rav Yitzchak, Bikurim, the first fruits, we go to page Yutes. Me'emasai mechayev aleha. From when does it become like the property of the Kohen, and that a non-Kohen who eats it will get malchus, right? It's like you're eating truma. When is it? When does it have? When you first cut it off? No. Mishiyiru pnei abayis. As soon as you brought it into the Beis Hamikdash, that's when it becomes asur for a non-Kohen to eat it. But prior to that, a non-Kohen could eat those fruits. So, come on, who is the author of that statement? Kaitana, like this Tana. The Tanya, we learned in the Brisa. Rabbi Lezer says, Bikurim, miktsasem b'chutz, miktsasem b'fnim. Let's say you have this massive pomegranate. Imagine a massive pomegranate. And half of it is outside the Beis Hamikdash, and half of it is inside the Beis Hamikdash. Sheba b'chutz, the part that's outside the Beis Hamikdash, harei hen kechulin l'chol devreim. It's like non-holy food, and anybody could partake in that part that's on the outside of the Beis Hamikdash. Shebefnim, but the part that is inside the Beis Hamikdash, harei hen kehegdish l'chol devreim, that has a din like hegdish, and all the trappings of Hegdish, and a non-Kohen is not allowed to eat that Bikurim. Says the Gemara, Amar Rav Sheshes said, Bikurim hanocham akeves behem. Bikurim, the waving and putting it down by the Mizbeach is very, very important. And you weren't yotzei the mitzvah, basically, until you do that. So it holds up the whole mitzvah. Kriya ein ma'akeves behem. Kriya, if you forgot to read those psukim, you still were makayim the mitzvah. So somehow you walked out, you're very shy, and you walked out without reading Arami Ovid Aviv, Arei Ramsayim, you didn't say these words. That is fine. You did do the mitzvah. So kriya, the reading of those psukim, ein ma'akeves behem, does not hold up the whole mitzvah. So that's Rav Sheshes' opinion. Come on, who is Rav Sheshes aligning himself to with? Kehai Tana, like the following Tana. The Tanya we learned in a Brisa, Rabbi Yossi Omer, Rabbi Yossi says, Shloisha Dvar Mishum Shloisha Zakenim. Rabbi Yossi said 3 things in the name of 3 elder Tanoim. One of the things that he said is Rabbi Yossi is saying in the name of Rabbi Shmuel Omer. Rabbi Yossi said over what Rabbi Shmuel said. And from this statement of Rabbi Shmuel, we're going to see that it must be that Rabbi Shmuel will hold that the reading is not as important. The waving is very important, but the reading is not so important. Why? Because the Gemara says, Rabbi Shmuel says, let's say Bisman Hazeh. Bisman Hazeh, let's say there's Kedusha in Eretz Yisrael, and you're giving off Trumas and Meisers. And you know what Meiser Sheni is, where, let's say you have a field outside of Jerusalem, you're supposed to take 10%, bring it up to the base, bring it up to Jerusalem, and celebrate there by eating it in Jerusalem. And that's the inyan of Meiser Sheni. The Chumash says that, let's say you have so much produce that it's hard to just carry it up. So then the Torah gives you a way out. You can transfer the Kedusha of Meiser Sheni onto money, and then just bring the money to Jerusalem, and then with the money, you buy meat and other produce, you buy karbanos, and you just really have a celebration party. The Torah wanted you to visit Jerusalem often, right? So every year you're supposed to set aside your Meiser Sheni. Either you bring the fruits themselves up to Jerusalem and eat it there, or you transfer it, the Kedusha money, and when you get to Jerusalem, you can buy whatever you want. Most things, only food items. So now, what happens now that we don't have a Beis Hamikdash? And the Torah says, I want you to eat the fruits of Meiser Sheni lifnei Hashem Elokecha, in front of the Eibishter in Jerusalem. So I would have thought, Yala Oda Meiser Sheni Bizman Hazeh B'Yerushalayim V'Yechaleno. I would have thought Bizman Hazeh, a person could go to Jerusalem and bring his fruits there and eat it. It says the Gemara V'Dinhu, that can't be so. Why? Because Bechor Ta'un Havois Makan. Let's say the Bechor, which is the firstborn animal that you give as a gift to the Kohen, really the Kohen is supposed to bring it as a carbon. And he brings it to the Beis Hamikdash. U'maiser sheni ta'on havos mokin. On Meiser Sheni, you have to bring it to the place, which means you bring it to Yerushalayim. So we're going to juxtapose. Ma b'char, just like b'char ein el b'fnei abayis, the idea of b'char is only when there's a Beis Hamikdash around. Of Meiser Sheni, Meiser ein el b'fnei abayis. So Meiser Sheni only applies when there's a Beis Hamikdash. So if someone is growing, has a fruit orchard somewhere in the north, he doesn't have to bring it up. He doesn't have to bring up the Meiser Sheni to Yerushalayim Bizman Hazeh. So the Gemara says, how do you know? Maybe Mala Bechar, a Bechar, the reason why the Bechar, you don't have to do anything Bizman Hazeh, because there's nothing to do. Shekain, Tol, Matan, Domim, the Emir Legabim Mizbech. You have to sprinkle the blood on them and bring some of the innards onto the Mizbeach. And there is no Mizbeach today. So of course, there's nothing to do with a Bechar today. So, but in Meiser Sheni, you could go to Jerusalem and just eat it around Mamila Mall, whatever. I mean, you could go to the old city and eat it. So why shouldn't you do it Bizman Hazeh? So the Gemara says, B'chirim yichicho. Bizman Hazeh, we don't have Bikurim. So the fact that you don't have Bikurim means that you're not going to have Meiser Sheni either. And Bikurim, you don't have to put anything, sprinkle any blood on the Mizbeach. Bikurim is just fruits that you give to the Kohen. So Gemara says, no. Mali bikurim, bikurim bisman hazeh. You can't do any bikurim bisman hazeh because part of the thing is shekain to unin hanocha. A very important component to do the mitzvah is putting it down by the mizbeach. But Ma'aser Sheni, you don't have to do anything. Just bring it to Yerushalayim. So we're back to square one. How do I know? Bisman hazeh, you don't bring Ma'aser Sheni fruits to Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, Talmud Loima, I have a pasuk that says, V'yachalta sham lifnei Hashem lakecha, ma'aser degoncha b'charis tzarcha. Here is a pasuk that really juxtaposes, compares Meiser to Bechar. Bechar is Meiser degoncha. The pasuk says compares Meiser to Bechar in one pasuk. So then you can't ask any question. Makish Meiser leBechar. The laws of Meiser Sheni has the same laws as Bechar. Ma Bechar, just like Bechar, Eina Elif Ne'abayis, only applies when the base of Migdash is around. Af Meiser, so also Meiser Sheni, Eina Elif Ne'abayis, only when the base of Migdash is around. Bisman hazeh, if you grow a field and you're outside Yerushalayim, you don't have to bring the fruits up to the base of Migdash. So that's it. Now, one of the things that Rabbi Shmuel says, that Bikurim, what makes Bikurim is Shekain to Unin Hanocha. You have to put it down by the base, by the Mizbeah. And other than that, you can't be Mekayim the mitzvah of Bikurim Bisman hazeh. V'im Isa, says the Gemara conclusion, if it's true that you also have to read that parsha, right, by the Mizbeach, Lifreich, he should have mentioned also, Ma'ala Bikurim, you can't be Yotze Bisman hazeh, Shekain to Unin, Kriya V'hanocha, you must read it and you must place it down. So you could say, so the question is, why didn't Rabbi Shmuel mention anything that Kriya is important? So it must be that Kriya is not so important, and only Hanocha is important. And that's exactly what Rav Shesha said. Bikurim Hanocha ma'akeves b'hem. Bikurim, the most important thing is to wave it and place it down by the Mizbeach. If Kriya ein ma'akas b'hem, if you forget to do the Kriya for somehow, don't worry, you did the mitzvah. And that's a proof from Rabbi Shmuel's statement. He only mentions that Bikurim would need Hanocha. So the Gemara pushes that away. Maybe it's not a raya. Amar Abashi, maybe it's not a raya. Because even if you want to say Bikurim, the Kriya is not important, not as important, but still, need Ikuva Leke, it wouldn't hold up the mitzvah if you didn't do it. But mitzvah mileka, is it no mitzvah to read? Of course there's a mitzvah to read. So even in the worst case scenario, lechatchila, a person should read that parsha, Arami Ovid Avi. So why didn't Rabbi Shmuel talk about the Kriya? Even if you hold Kriya is not a mitzvah, he should mention that as part of the mitzvahs that you do with Bikurim. V'leima mitzvah lifreich. And he should mention something about the mitzvah and ask. Elam Ravasi says, Kevon the Ike Bekuri Hager, the boil Meimash Nishba Hashem Lavasenu. There's one case where, and a few cases, but let's take one absolute case where a person will bring Bikurim and we don't let him even begin to read the Parsha of Arami Ovidavi. That's if a convert, he can't say, he can't read the Bikurim, because one of the statements that you say in the Kriya is you have to say, Ashenishba Hashem Lavasenu. I came to this land that God swore to my fathers, right? The Yavien basis praise here. He got the Lavoy and Yom Kivosil Oretz Ashenishba Hashem Lavasenu Losaslonu. And a ger can't say these words on the screen. So therefore, since a ger is not going to say Kriya is not in every scenario. So like psikle, it's not an absolute, and therefore he didn't mention it. So it's no proof. Could be Kriya is, you have to say Kriya, but the reason why Shmuel didn't say it because sometimes you're not allowed to say it. Because a ger is not allowed to read because he can't say a lie. I came to the land that Hashem swore to my fathers when his fathers weren't Jewish. So the Gemara just asks a question. The question is, why taka can't I learn from Bikurim and Bechor? Why do I need this whole hekesh, that a real hekesh in the pasuk that compares compares Ma'aser Sheni to Bechor? Let it just say straight out that I have a mahatzad, that I find a common denominator. That is that both by Bechor and by Bekurim are not noyeg bezman hazeh to bring to do anything Yerushalayim. So therefore, Ma'aser Sheni also. Answers the Gemara, Mishim the Ikal Mifrach, because that Mahatzad, I could say, Malatzad Shovish Bem Sheyesh Behem Tzad HaMizbeach. Those mitzvahs, Bikurim and Bechor, have to do something with the Mizbeach, sprinkle on the Mizbeach, wave the basket and put it down by the Mizbeach. Therefore, Bizman Hazeh, you don't do it. But maybe Ma'aser Sheni, you would do it. That's why I need the Pasik that juxtaposes Ma'aser to Bechor. So now the Gemara asks a question, my Kesavar, what really does this Tana hold? Ikasava, does he hold? Now, really, Bechor, there's a part of it that after you sprinkle the blood on the Mizbeach, you have to eat the meat in Jerusalem, right? So let us say a scenario like this. Right before this Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, a man brought a Bechor and sprinkled the blood on the Mizbeach. And then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So, what would you say to that Bechor? Should he eat that Bechor in Jerusalem or not? This is the Gemara's question. Now, again, before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed, a guy brought a Bechor, sprinkled the blood, and was makta the Amirim. Then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed that day. And now, what should he do with the meat of the Bechor? Should he eat it around Jerusalem? What does this Tana hold? If he holds Kedusha Rishayna Kitchel Shaitza Kitchel Asad Lavai, that even after the Beis HaMikdash is destroyed, once there was a Kedusha on the spot of the Harabayas, it remains forever. So then, Afila Bechor Nami, a Bechor also has to be eaten. Ma'aser Sheni has to be in there because the Beis HaMikdash is around. And not only that, even if you didn't shech the Bechor, you would have to bring a Bechor right today, because you don't need a temple to bring a Bechor. All you'd have to do is shech the Bechor right on where the dome of the mosque is, and the dome of the rock is, and then sprinkle the blood somewhere where you think the Mizbeach is, or make a makeshift Mizbeach. But if you hold Kedusha Rishayna Kitchel Shaitav like Kitchel Asad Lavai, and you can tell me that there is no Kedusha on the Temple Mount today, so Afilu Bechor Nami Tibaya, then let's have a question on a similar situation where you have to eat the meat of the Bechor. Suppose it was sprinkled while the Beis HaMikdash was around, then you destroyed. So there is no Kedusha on the temple, but still you have to eat the Bechor somewhere in Jerusalem. So even by a Bechor itself, you could have this same question. Would you eat that Bechor when the Beis HaMikdash is around? In the Yerushalayim. Ravina said, he holds that there is no Kedusha on the Beis HaMikdash. And even in our case, a Bechor that they sprinkled the blood before the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. And Bechor Habayis, then the Beis HaMikdash was destroyed. So you were Yaitse bringing the carbon. And the meat is still around, still you wouldn't have to eat that meat in Jerusalem. Because you would compare the meat to the blood. Just like the blood of a Bechor b'mizbeach only has Kedusha or whatever it has, but it only applies when the Beis HaMikdash was around, when there was a Mizbeach. So the meat, when it has to be eaten, only when there's a Mizbeach around. When there is no Mizbeach, you don't have a problem of eating it wherever you want. And now that I know the basar, the basar of a Bechor, no matter what, you don't have to eat it in Jerusalem. Makos Ma'aser Sheni the Bechor. I'm going to compare Ma'aser Sheni to Bechor. And just like Bechor, you don't have to eat it around Jerusalem. So Ma'aser Sheni does not have to be eaten around Jerusalem. B'zman hazeh. Says the Gemara, V'chidama halomed behegdish choyzer melamed behegish. So a question, something that basar itself only knows that you don't eat it because it's compared to blood, right? So can that now, so basar itself is not the source, the blood is the source, and basar is learned from the blood. Now the basar is going to teach Ma'aser Sheni that it doesn't apply, you don't have to eat in Jerusalem. Something that's learned from a hekesh cannot teach others with a hekesh. And that's a din in Kachim, which we're going to learn. That's a rule in Kachim. Something itself is not a source, but it learned it from somewhere else, cannot teach that idea to something else. And says the Gemara, Ma'aser Dagan Chulinhu. Ma'aser Dagan is, Ma'aser Sheni is not Kedushadik. It's a din that you have to eat it in Yerushalayim, but it's not a holy thing, and therefore it could learn it. It could the basar of Bechor could teach Ma'aser Sheni. Says the Gemara, we go to Amud Beis. Hanicha, this would make perfect sense. According to the opinion, it says that the teacher, if it learned it from somewhere else, cannot teach it to somewhere if it's kachim, which is basar bechar is kachim, cannot teach that idea to anywhere. He cannot even teach it to Ma'aser Sheni. We don't go after the student. If we say that the student could be chulin, that would make perfect sense. But you're saying that the teacher itself, if it learned its idea from somewhere else, it cannot teach it to a third party when it itself is not the source. And says the Gemara, Dama ubasa chad milsid. Blood and the meat are one source; they're one of the same. And basically, what the Gemara is saying is that bechor, we have a source that bechor, the meat of the bechor, no matter what, even if you destroyed the base of Migdash, will not be eaten in Jerusalem. And now we can teach that to Ma'aser Sheni, that Ma'aser Sheni b'zman hazeh, you don't have to bring it to Jerusalem, and there's no chiyuv to eat it in Yerushalayim. New Gemara. The Gemara says, what happens, let's say, in the b'zman habayis, right? You have Ma'aser Sheni and Kachay Kachem, that you didn't paid it. You didn't redeem it. Ma'aser Sheni, and you ate it outside Yerushalayim. Ma'aser Sheni, you ate it outside Yerushalayim. What do? You get malchus. So that's what it says. So the Gemara asks, Tanina Chadizim. This idea was taught twice in the Mishnah. Earlier in the Mishnah, it says Ma'aser Sheni v'hegdish lo nivdu. Ma'aser Sheni and hegdish that were not redeemed, you get malchus if you eat it if it was not redeemed. So why does the Mishnah say the same idea twice? That Ma'aser Sheni, if you didn't bring it to Jerusalem and you ate it outside the walls of Yerushalayim, you get malchus. Amar Rabbi Yaisi bar Chanina, Seifa, but Ma'aser Sheni tar v'gavra tar. You're right. The end of the Mishnah is talking about when the Ma'aser Sheni is tar and the person is tar. So you have regular Ma'aser Sheni, but you're outside Jerusalem. If you eat it outside the wall, you get malchus. Reisha, but the beginning of the Mishnah is b'Ma'aser Sheni tanui v'gavra tanui v'kol ochel b'Yerushalayim. Here's even further. The Ma'aser Sheni that's tamei, and the man is tamei, right? And he's eating the Ma'aser Sheni in Yerushalayim. So there, if you eat Ma'aser Sheni that's tamei in Yerushalayim, you also get malchus. How do I know you're not allowed to eat Ma'aser Sheni when the Ma'aser Sheni is tamei, or when you're tamei? The Tanya, we learned to the Brayser of Shimon Omer, lo bi'artu b'menu b'tamei. The pasuk says regarding Ma'aser Sheni, I did not consume it when I was tamei. Bein shani tamei v'hu tar. Doesn't matter where you're tamei and the Ma'aser Sheni is tar. Bein shani tar, if you're tar v'hu tamei, if you're tar and the Ma'aser Sheni is tamei, the Torah tells us that you're not allowed to. You're not allowed to destroy it or eat it, consume it when you're tamei. Says the Gemara, the Heichen Muzar al Achila. When did the Torah say that you're not allowed to eat it when you're tamei? Here it's just the confession that you're making that I did not do that. But the Torah is hinting that someplace else the Torah told you don't eat the Ma'aser Sheni when you're tamei. Where is that? Where's the pasuk in the Torah like that? So any a day, I don't know. But the Gemara says, wait a second, what do you mean you don't know? Tumas Haguf behed yiksiv. Tumas Haguf, it says, when you're tamei, it says straight out, Nefesh ashatiga boy v'tama the eres v'lo yochel min hakachim. If you're tamei, don't eat kachim. And if tumas atzmei minalan, how do I know that if you're tamei and the Ma'aser Sheni is tahar, right? So that how do I know you're not allowed to eat it? This pasuk says if you touch the Ma'aser Sheni and it becomes tamei, you're not allowed to eat it. Fine. If the Ma'aser Sheni is tamei, nobody's allowed to eat it. But how do you know if the Ma'aser Sheni is tar and you're tamei? How do you know you're not allowed to eat it? So the Gemara says, the pasuk says, you're not allowed to eat it in your. The Torah tells you Ma'aser Sheni, you're not allowed to eat it in your cities. Bring it to Jerusalem. And later it says, a bechor that's a balmum, so that's a regular simple animal, and you can eat it anywhere. So at Tanya, we learned in the Bryce the Berib Shmuel, afilu tome v'tari oichlin bekar echas vein chosheshim, that a bechor that's a balmum and that you shechted it anywhere, you don't have to keep tahara with it. Anybody, a tome and a tar, could eat it. Wherever the Torah is now telling you, by a bechor balmum, a tummy is permitted because there you're allowed to eat it in your cities. But when I'm telling you, you're not allowed to eat in your cities, hacha by ma'aseh loy techel, you're not allowed to eat it when you're tummy. You could only eat it when you're tar. So we have a source that when you're tummy, you're not allowed to eat ma'aseh, and when the ma'aseh is tummy, you're also not allowed to eat ma'aseh. I just want to point out important, and then we'll stop in another 2 minutes. Right over here in the Rashi, it's a very important Rashi. It says over here that Rashi was writing the Pirush on Masechta Makos, and Rabbeinu Gufay Tahar, Yotz Nishmasa B'Tahara, Loi Pirush Yoser. This is exactly where Rashi ended his Pirush. I mean, he probably explained other Masechtas, earlier than he explained this, but when he was writing Masechta Makos, that's when Rashi died, and the rest was Mekam Ve'elach is Talmidai Rabbi Yehuda Bar Nasan. What was finished in Masechta Makos was Rabbi Yehuda Bar Nasan. So we know what Masechta, the last thing Rashi was there. Let's just do another minute. Umanolan de Bapadeyahu. How do I know that, very quickly, how do I know if you have Maisa Sheni that's Tameh in Yerushalayim, how do you know you're allowed to be paid on money, transfer the Kedusha on money, and buy something else? How do you know that Maishin Sheni became Tameh? You can redeem it even in Yerushalayim. Talmud Loima, the Torah tells you that you're allowed to redeem something. What is Se'esoi? If the reason why you paid to something is because you can't Se'esoi means you can't eat it, so therefore the Torah is giving you a way out, is because if it's Tameh, you can actually redeem it while it's Tameh, even if you're in Shalayim. Let's say you have this heavy bag of Yerushalayim, of produce, of Ma'aseh Sheni, and you're 1 foot outside Yerushalayim. How do I know I could be paid to the Ma'aseh Sheni, even if all I have to do is schlep it over like 1 foot, and I'll be in Yerushalayim? But as the answer is, if it's something that you can't carry because it's too heavy, even if you're 1 foot out of Yerushalayim, you could be paid. Says the Gemara. So it teaches you 2 things. It teaches you that Ma'aseh Sheni Tomei, you could be paid in Yerushalayim, and even if it's a heavy bag and you're 1 step out of Yerushalayim, you could also be paid even if it's not Tomei. So it says the Gemara, how can you learn 2 things out from this idea? You need it from Rabbi Lezer that you could be paid to Ma'aseh Sheni when it became Tamei, Yerushalayim. So the Gemara says, "In Kain lema kra leisucha la'oichla, you can't eat it." My se'esoi. What does it mean you can't se'esoi? So the Gemara says, "Ve'mel kuli ha'chadiasim came lema kra leisucha litloi my se'esoi shema min otartis." So so many times you could see 2 ideas from a pasuk. Se'esoi teaches you could be paid if it's tamei and you can't eat it, and you could also be paid if you can't carry it, even though it's just 1 inch out of Yerushalayim. Okay, we're going to stop over here by Yosef. Okay, good to nacht, everybody.
Thank you so much.
Okay, good nacht, everybody.